Good afternoon and welcome to Politics in the Pulpit here on your hometown station. This is your holy host, the Bishop of Santa Clarita, Pastor Jerry Cook, back for another opportunity to talk about the two things that nobody wants to talk about, especially the closer we get to the election, which is really only 48 days. Politics and religion, the two things that I think do indeed mix. And as I just mentioned, the election is literally, under 50 days now. And things are getting more and more ratcheted up. If you were listening in and you were thinking that Lucy Volotsky was going to be on today, sorry. Unfortunately, we had to cancel Lucy because of a couple of little hiccups that kind of through the FCC, but I can't really get into all that inside baseball stuff right now. But just know that we originally had her scheduled for today, and it did not work out. So, Lord willing, we'll hear from Lucy after the November 5th election, and we'll be talking about the successful run of actually getting Henry Stern out of the 27th district. So we'll talk to Lucy after the election, or the other way to get Lucy back on is actually to see if Lucy and Henry Stern can both come on at the same time and debate. That would be wonderful. So if you want to see something like that, or if you want to see Lucy and Henry Stern do that kind of thing, just email the KHTS here and we'll see if we can work that out. Well, obviously, as I just mentioned, we're coming just under 50 days here to the election, and things are getting more and more heated. Many of you already know that the president just underwent another assassination attempt over the weekend on Sunday. We'll get into that news in just a second. At the very end of the show, just before we get to our before we conclude our show today, I want to talk a little bit about Christians and voting. And I've been hearing more and more Christians tell me that they just don't feel like their vote is going to count, and that they should not vote, and they're going to sit this election out. Now, folks, let me just say something real quickly. I don't think anybody, Christian or non-Christian, I don't think you should sit this election out, or any election for that matter. And so I want to talk a little bit at the very end of the show, our last segment, on why I believe you are acting like Pilate in the New Testament when you decide to go neutral by supposedly saying that you don't want to vote. And in fact, I would suggest that a non-vote is in fact a vote. So listen in as we deal with that at the very end of the show for our final segment. Well, here we are in Hometown Station, and for the last year or so, I have had my son, Jerry Jr., as board op, and he's 18 years old, son of a preacher man. Boy, that reminds you of an old song from 1965. And he is now working for Sam's Club, and he's got his driver's license, so that means that he's 18, he has a job, he has a driver's license, and he obviously knows everything. So that means that this preacher needs to have a new board operator, and we have a new board operator, and her name, well, she's not new to KHTS and Hometown Station, but she is new to this gentleman. So Jen, welcome to Politics and the Pulpit as the board op.
Thank you. And unlike your son, I don't know everything. I'm still learning, so we'll get there.
I feel so humbled to know that someone is in my territory of life where I don't know everything either.
Certainly. I have, you and I were talking off the air, I have a 15-year-old boy who thinks that he's 25, so it's a struggle every day.
The struggle is real, Jen, and God bless you on that, because, it's so funny. A lot of people will say to me, well, you're a pastor. Obviously, things must be very harmonious in your household. No, actually, Satan shows up every day in the form of a teenage boy.
Sure.
And sometimes my 12-year-old as well. Not my 9-year-old girl. She's, of course, an angelic being.
She's
all
still good.
the time.
Yes.
I don't care what my wife says.
12, they get a little tricky, too. I also have a 12-year-old, and she's sometimes sweet, sometimes a little sour. So
sweet, even like Chinese food.
Yeah. True. Not as much sodium, though. Yeah.
Well, excellent. Well, Jen, thank you so much for stepping in.
Of course. Happy to be here.
And at the same time, we know that every once in a while you may not be on the board up here. It might be Andrew, but if you're here consistently, I'm glad you can listen into these diatribes.
Thank you. I'm ready.
And you can either go, that was good, or just say, I don't know about that one.
Yeah, I'll take notes. Don't worry.
Oh, that's good. Well, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, yes, we just had another assassination attempt last Sunday, so I was coming out of church. We were about to perform a baptism at 1 o'clock on Sunday, and right before I got into the waters, one of the men of our church said, "Hey, I just got news over my phone that former President Trump has just thwarted another assassination attempt." Technically, this is his third, and there's some sort of news happening today that I haven't got verified yet from Red State that is suggesting that there were some bombs in a vehicle somewhere close to where Trump is going to be speaking today in New York City. So that has not been verified. If you want to check that story out, go to redstate.com and see if there's any updates on that. But if you remember, obviously July in Butler, Pennsylvania is when, of course, in a sense, he didn't just survive, but of course was affected by an assassin's bullet that nicked his ear and evidently ended up killing somebody named Corey. I cannot pronounce that guy's name, unfortunately, but a gentleman died and a couple folks were injured during that rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. And then about 3 weeks or 4 weeks later, Donald Trump was down at the border doing something, checking the border out. I think he was talking to some border agents, and an attempted assassin was somewhere in the vicinity of former President Trump, and they were able to get him out of there. So that was the second attempt. And then, of course, this one on Sunday at his golf course there in West Palm Beach, where evidently, as they're describing it in the news media, an AK-styled gun, I love how they do that, an AK-styled AK-47 with a scope on top. I guess he had a bunch of other stuff there in his bag. And then if it wasn't for a regular Joe like you and I taking a picture of this guy getting his car and snapping his license plate, who knows what would have happened. I'm sure inevitably they would have caught this guy. But if it wasn't for this passerby, taking those snapshots and then sending them to the proper authorities, who knows what would have happened. So here we are, and we've had 3 potential assassination attempts on former President Trump. And this is in less than 2.5 months. And then, again, I don't know what's going on in New York City with this bomb material found in a vehicle. Again, check out Red State. That may be something that ended up being nothing. But again, check it out and see what it says there now. But what I think is interesting is now both sides are going on the talking head shows and basically complaining about political rhetoric. Now, let's just be honest. We have had political rhetoric in our country for a very, very long time. In fact, there have been 45 men elected president since the country's founding, and 40% of them have experienced known attempts on their lives. And 4 of the 40% obviously have been assassinated. Abraham Lincoln, of course, we all know. James Garfield, which of course is not just a reference to a cat that doesn't move its mouth. William McKinley, for whom the mountain was originally named, but now of course it's, I forget what they call it now. And then John F. Kennedy in 1963 have all been assassinated. And then some of us were around long enough to remember former President Ronald Reagan being shot at and, of course, injured, and thankfully doctors were able to save his life there in 1983, I believe it was. And so, this stuff is not unusual. However, what is unusual is the amount of assassination attempts on former President Trump. Now, some people would say this, and they'll say, well, listen, his mouth gets him into trouble. Now, listen, if that's the case, then people should shoot at me. I've been pastoring for 22 years. I've got 22 years worth of YouTube sermons, and I'm sure my mouth could get me in trouble as well. But the fact of the matter is, I don't care how bombastic somebody is, and obviously he's a Queens New Yorker who speaks very brashly. I know that we are not used to that in our politics, and I will say that he definitely ticked it up a notch in 2016 when he ran the first time. There's no doubt that the way he talked and the way he did things was definitely not the norm within politics. Many of us were used to the Bob Doles and the George H.W. Bushes and the very the kind ways of dealing with things. And then we come to 2016, and here's this brash, I'm going to say whatever I want, off the hip kind of dude. And really, for the last decade, it has really changed our politics in a lot of ways, both good and bad. And I believe that it's very possible that a lot of the left is hiding behind the fact that because Trump, in some sense, can be insufferable, that he is bringing on all of this upon himself. And I'm sure that there are people that believe that right now. But you know what's interesting? You probably think, well, nobody on the Democratic side would ever wish President Trump any harm. Well, I have a Red State article that dropped this morning, and it says this. Shocking poll finds 28% of Democrats wish Trump had been assassinated. As the Democrats and their lapdog media continue to absurdly blame Donald Trump for 2 assassination attempts on his life over the course of just 64 days, a shocking new poll found that nearly 3 out of 10 Democrats think America would be better off if the former president had been killed. And by the way, this poll cannot be inconsistent because if you remember, if you think back in your mind's eye to just 64 days ago, some of the memes that were going around from even some guys on the left that are friends with me, saying things like, we won't miss the next time, and they're trying to be funny, but there is a sense in which they're being honest. And so this article goes on to say, then again, given the constant rage rhetoric on the left, the poll results aren't shocking at all. A new poll of 1,000 registered voters conducted by veteran pollster Scott Rasmussen, this was taken after the second assassination attempt against Trump on Sunday, found that 17% of respondents believe it would have been better for the country if one of the attempts had succeeded, including 28% of Democrats. That 28% speaks volumes about the radicalized left, none of it shocking, all of it ominous. Now, this article goes on to say something else that's rather interesting. Who do a plurality of Americans believe is driving would-be assassins to act in this way? Any guesses, according to the article? Well, here's more. Quote, Americans also had strong thoughts on what was driving the would-be assassins to act. 45% suggesting it was anti-Trump rhetoric and 41% suggesting it was news media coverage. Voters also had a theory about the motives of the alleged shooter, with 46% saying they were, quote, crazed individuals, while 33% believed they were part of an organized effort. Now listen, I wouldn't go so far as to say that there's some sort of mole or some inside job happening within the FBI and the Secret Service, and that's not to suggest that it could not be happening. I'm just saying I have no evidence to suggest that it is. However, for someone to know that President Trump was playing on that course on Sunday and to be down the fairway of him, expecting him to be at a certain location at a certain time, would suggest to me that this man has done some major surveillance, that this man has had time to think and plot out what he was going to do on this Sunday with former President Donald Trump playing on, his golf course, which, by the way, he does quite often on Sundays. So there is a lot of plotting and a lot of planning that went into the activities of Sunday. And again, we thank God that that he was caught. And this guy, evidently originally from Hawaii, has only been here for a little bit and has a weird track record of voting between Republicans and Democrats, and doesn't like Trump, but then does like Trump, likes Democrats, but then doesn't like Democrats. So who knows, maybe all of that might be on purpose by him with an anticipation of knowing that if I got caught, that nobody could peg me as to which political party that I had my fealty towards and allegiance towards. So who knows, maybe that was something in his mind at the time. But the fact of the matter is, we still don't know everything about what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, and it's been 65 days since that event occurred. Now, I'm just going to throw something out there, and again, you might think this is a little bit a Republican right-wing talking point here, but this is just an average citizen asking a question. If it were Vice President Harris that was shot at and perhaps hit in Butler, Pennsylvania, I am sure the media frenzy would be completely different, and we would have seen an endless loop upon endless loop and endless government inquiries upon government inquiries. And I'm just not seeing that with former President Trump. And so it leads me to believe, and again, this is just me, observation, it's leading me to believe that there are some on one side of the political aisle that really kind of wish that maybe somebody will be successful. And I don't wish that on any one of our candidates or anybody in the United States of America. It is already tough to run for public office in the United States of America. I mean, you're running against the media, you're running with the media, and of course you've got all of your detractors out there. But what are you going to do? I mean, that's how I feel as an American, and I'm observing this, and that's the way I see it. When we come back here on Politics in the Pulpit, we're going to pick up another article by Kip Mueller, who is, of course, running for state Senate here in California. We're going to be talking a little bit about him lying about his record of being a criminal prosecutor when we come back on Politics in the Pulpit here on your hometown station. All right, we're back here. This is Pastor Cook, back for another opportunity to make you mad, make you sad, make you glad. Here on your hometown station, we just left you with a little tease here about Kip Mueller. We have been talking about this particular article that now has started to gain traction over the last couple of weeks. 2 weeks ago, friend Jennifer Van Laar with Red State dropped an article about Kip Mueller lying about his, quote, background as a criminal prosecutor. And then there were 2 articles written here at KHTS by Carl Goldman, and one of which basically told Kip to step down and step out of this race because of his incessant lying. And then now it is the Daily News here in Los Angeles that has picked up the story, and I'm glad because that means that it's gaining some traction and it's not going away fast. But let me just read a little bit to you. Kip Mueller is running state senate. Is running for state senate in the sprawling 23rd Senate District. And if you don't know where that is, that district spans Santa Clarita, at least a large portion of Santa Clarita, on the west to Victorville and Hesperia on the east, and goes way north beyond Lancaster. So this is a very sprawling piece of district. However, a lot of it is fallow ground. It's open desert, so there's a lot of that as well. And up through my area, Agua Dulce and Acton and all that, that's all part of the 23rd Senate District. So this is a competitive race. Mueller came in pretty close to then Senator Scott Wilk during the last iteration, and I think Scott barely won that race by 2 or 3 points, but don't quote me on that. I know it was really close. And now former Assembly member Suzette Valladares is running, of course, to maintain that seat by Senator Scott Wilk, and Mueller is coming in to see if he can snatch it up for the Democrats. But his campaign site at the time noted that he served in President Obama's Department of Justice in the Consumer Protection Branch and joined the Santa Clara District Attorney's Office to protect the community from sexual predators and fraudsters. Now, 4 years later, and by the way, there was nothing wrong with any of that information. That's when he first ran. Now, 4 years later, referring to now, he touted this same experience in an endorsement survey he filled out to this very newspaper, referring to the Daily News here. He wrote the following references to his experience as a prosecutor, quote, "My background as a criminal prosecutor combined with my deep commitment to public service makes me uniquely qualified for this office. Secondly, he said, as a former prosecutor and the only candidate in this race who has a law enforcement background, I understand what it takes to ensure that communities feel safe and that serious crimes are addressed effectively. And as a former criminal prosecutor, I'm the only candidate in this race with law enforcement experience, and I understand firsthand what it takes to keep our communities safe." Now, this certainly sounds very legitimate and seems to underscore his clearly established track record as a prosecutor, except it now seems like Kip Mueller is at best exaggerating his experience as a prosecutor and at worst misleading the public he wants to represent in public and in Sacramento. So as I just mentioned at the bottom of the hour, 2 weeks ago, journalist Jennifer Van Laar with Red State said this, that Mueller was never employed by the U.S. Department of Justice or the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office. And Van Laar goes on to say, we found no evidence that he prosecuted fraudsters and sexual abusers. And Van Laar walked through various instances of Mueller's claiming to have prosecuted major cases, only to find no substantiation for these claims. And as far as I know, there has been absolutely no word from Mueller's campaign on whether any of this is being exaggerated on the right side of the political aisle. So as far as I know, everything that Van Laar has said, everything that Carl Goldman has written here in the two editorials stand as accurate, and that Mueller is misleading you in order to curry favor and get votes. Folks, if a man, or a woman for that matter, can lie to you while running for office, they no doubt can lie to you while in office. And I don't know why anybody, even on the left, if you're listening today and you happen to be on the the left side of the political ledger here, I mean, I'm assuming you believe in lying like I do. I mean, if you're embellishing your record, if you're saying things that are not accurate about who you are as an individual, does that not speak to the very character of the individual seeking your vote? I would think it does. And I would say the same thing about somebody running on the right. If Suzette Valadares says that she's a former prosecutor, it's very clear that we can find out very easily whether or not that is the case. I would be the first one to call her out right here on radio. In fact, I would encourage her to come in and try to defend her words. And if she could, great. If she couldn't, then that's a problem. And I have to be honest too about Suzette. I'm not the biggest fan of Suzette because if it was Suzette's Republican vote that gave us Prop 1 here in California, thus sanctioning and cementing the right of abortion in our state constitution here in California. Now, I know we're a leftward state and we're deep, deep, deep blue, and we make Hawaii look like they're Republicans. But the fact of the matter is, it was her lone Republican vote that did that. So I've got my issues with Suzette, but when it comes to who I think best will best represent the 27th district, I believe that it's going to be, or the 23rd district, I think that would be Suzette, and it would not be Kip Mueller. And what's funny is it's important for us to call out these things when they come out. This radio station, KHTS, has not had the Mueller campaign notify us about the 4 questions that I read last week that the campaign has not answered. And now this news story about him embellishing his record, or at least misleading the public about his record, is gaining more and more traction. And I hope the LA Times, I doubt, but I hope the LA Times does pick it up, and some others as well. All right, when we left you earlier, we were talking about President Trump and how 28% of the Democrats were actually upset that he didn't get killed by the assassin's bullet. What if I were to ask you, if Gallup took a poll and asked the question, who is more popular, who is running for president, Kamala Harris or former President Trump, who would you think they would choose in that Gallup poll? Now, you're probably thinking logically they're going to go with Kamala or Kamala, however you want to pronounce your name. I got another Red State article here that will surprise you in terms of the results, because this is totally amazing that Trump in this poll would actually be more popular than Harris. Now, it's not by much. It's 46 favorable to Kamala Harris's 44 favorable. So obviously, within the margin of error, if you want to look at it that way, to be fair. Now, where it really is striking is among independents, those who are not in any political ideology, left or right. Among independents, Trump is favored 44 to Harris 35. That's not good, because both sides are going after those independents. They're the ones that seem to be the most malleable, right? I mean, if you're a conservative, hardline Republican like I am, you're not malleable. You already know who you're going to vote for. If you're a entrenched left-wing Democrat, you already know who you're going to vote for, right? But then there are those independents that are able to be swayed either way. And when they say that Trump is seen more favorable by almost, 9 points, that's pretty interesting. I was very shocked to actually read that. However, here's what's even more interesting. The favorable for Donald Trump at 46% is actually gone up by 5 points, and his unfavorables have gone down by 2. Now, I don't know how, but like I said earlier, it seems like sometimes Trump can be rather insufferable. But then there are moments when he has, I don't know, comical overtones where I just laugh and say, you know what, you just take the good with the bad. Or maybe we've just gotten used to his style. It's been 10 years, folks. I mean, he came down that escalator in 2015. It will be 10 years in just a short couple of months. And maybe we're just getting used to it, that particular style. And so I just find it interesting. I wonder how the Harris campaign is coping with that information, because obviously they probably think that they were going to be the most favored. Now, if you're watching the Sunday shows over the weekend, if you happen to watch Dana Bash on CNN, she had Vice Presidential candidate J.D. Vance on. And I don't have the clip for me today, but on Dana Bash's show, Dana made a huge hue and cry over President Trump talking about the whole Haitian immigration thing in Springfield, Ohio, and whether or not they were, cooking ducks and killing ducks and geese. Now, since that debate, there has been a 911 call that came in talking about some guy that just was biking down the road and saw what he said were 2 Haitians that were carrying headless geese away from the lake, and assumed that they had beheaded them and are now going to take them back to their homeless encampment to cook it up. Now that is a literal recording. You could find that right now. Google it if you want. Haitian recording 2 geese beheaded, something like that. However, one of the things that Dana Bash kept going on and on and on about was the fact that Trump and J.D. Vance, because of their rhetoric about the Haitians, somehow caused bomb threats to some of the hospitals in the area. And that was a big deal to Dana Bash. Until Monday, when the governor of Ohio governor contradicts Democrat narrative with damning revelation about bomb threat in Springfield. And by the way, I think it's fair to say that Governor DeWine is a middle-of-the-road Republican. He is not a staunchly pro-Trump Republican. Now, again, I don't think he's antithetical to Trump, but he's just not one of those guys that is going to just always be pro-Trump no matter what Trump says. But Governor DeWine came out and says this: Ohio's Republican governor revealed on Monday that reported bomb threats against various sites in Springfield, Ohio, that have been blamed on Republicans' rhetoric surrounding the Haitian migrant crisis in the town were all, quote, hoaxes. He said, quote, 33 threats, 33 hoaxes, Governor Mike DeWine announced during a press conference. Quote, I want to make that very, very clear. None of these had any validity at all. And then he went on to say that many of the threats came from overseas. Overseas. I wonder why he didn't say Russia. Remember 3 weeks ago, when the Department of Justice and Merrick Garland came out and talked about how Russia is going to be playing another role in this election? And here we have, according to Governor Mike DeWine, these hoaxes about bomb threats originated overseas. Now, here's what's interesting. The media went nuts with Merrick Garland's assertion that Russia was going to influence this election and that Russia and Trump are somehow in cahoots with each other and all those kinds of things that you and I all heard in 2016 and 2020, right? Well, here's what's interesting. If, in fact, the hoaxes did come from overseas, and if, in fact, those hoaxes did originate with Russia, then that means that the American media, specifically Dana Bash at CNN, carried the political water for Russia for at least 24 to 48 hours until we found out that it was all a hoax. You see how this Russian disinformation is actually being bandied about and how it's being disseminated? It's being disseminated by our own American media. And then it's being debunked 2, 3, 4 days later. Then they can say, well, it's debunked, so we're gonna retract it, we're gonna pull it off the air, what have you. Folks, the damage had already been done, is my point. The damage had already been done. The media were willful idiots, the sycophants that pushed this story out into the universe out there, where everyone's thinking all the Republicans now don't like Haitians. Of course we like Haitians. We just want Haitians to be here legal, and we don't want them to be eating cats and dogs, and I'm not suggesting they're eating cats and dogs. But go listen to the 911 report. None of that has been debunked. The guy sounds really honest. He's just biking down the road, and he ends up calling the 911 and says, listen, is this for the emergency line or is this for information? And the gal says it's for information. Well, I just saw what I think are two migrant Haitians walking down the road back to their homeless encampment with 2 headless geese. What do you do with that? Now, again, I'm not saying they get the death penalty for killing geese, but at the same time, doesn't that carry some sort of truth to where maybe there's something going on? I don't know. But all I can say is this. This is week 2 of cat hysteria and dog hysteria and goose hysteria about the Haitians. And I'm still waiting for CNN's Dana Bash to apologize, because she spent a whole 4 minutes talking about these threats, these bomb threats, and within 24 hours, in fact, less than 24 hours, the governor of Ohio said they're all hoaxes. And CNN is left carrying the water of some foreign entity that gave us that false information. When we come back on Politics in the Pulpit here on your hometown station, I want to talk about the importance of this election and why you as Christians in particular need to get off of your blessed assurances and vote when we come back on your hometown station. All right, we're back here for our final segment, and this is where I want to chastise my evangelical brethren out there. And those of you who may not even be Christians, you might actually get something insightful out of this last segment. But I've been hearing a lot of talk about, especially Christians, who wring their hands and say, oh, there's both sides are bad and there's nothing we can do. No, listen, can I say something to you? There's always a lesser of two evils, and I'm not suggesting that Trump is evil. I'm just suggesting there's always a lesser of two evils, okay? There's always somebody that's further to the left and further down the road than you want them to be politically. And there's no doubt that there is some political and ideological differences between President Trump and Kamala Harris. There just is. And there's always been this dichotomy between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Now, maybe not in 1960, when JFK was running against Richard Nixon. There were actually a lot of ideological agreement, frankly. But we're not talking about your grandparents' Democratic Party, and we're not talking about your grandparents' Republican Party. It's completely different today, and that's a topic for another day. But what do we do in just a short 47 days from today, on November 5th, where we have to face a choice election, a binary choice? And I've heard some Christians saying, well, I'm going to sit it out, and I'm not going to vote at all. I want to make the argument that actually not voting is a vote. You actually are making a choice. And the biblical analogy that I would like to provide for you is something that you can all remember, and you at least remember the gospel account of Pilate and Jesus coming before Pilate just before he's to be crucified. And you'll remember that Pilate's wife came to him and said, listen, don't have anything to do with this Jesus. I had a dream, and this guy's innocent. And Pilate basically said so much as well. If you read Matthew's gospel, John's gospel, Pilate basically said, he looked at the crowd that kept yelling, crucify him, crucify him. What has this man done? That he should be warranted the ultimate punishment that you are wanting me to sanction, which is crucifixion. And they offered no reasons other than, of course, the prophetic fact that Jesus was going to be crucified, if you look through the Old Testament. But the prophecies notwithstanding, a political leader looks at the crowd that is yelling, crucify him, and says, could you please tell me what he's done? I have looked and observed, and I have found nothing that this man has done. And so what does he do right before he acquiesces to the mob crowd that gets more and more animated, yelling, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him? He ceremoniously washes his hands, right? He ceremoniously washes his hands, and what does he say? He says, I am now innocent of this man's blood. Now again, he really wasn't innocent. It was a ceremonious act. I get it. But here's what he was basically saying. I'm neutral. I'm neither for him. I'm not against him. May I say that act of neutrality that at least in Pilate's own mind thought was worthy, which isn't and wasn't. I mean, to this day, when I think of a politician that gave in to the crowd, I think of Pilate. I mean, that was his decision. His crowd was just to simply make the crowd happy. And even though he clearly said, I don't find anything guilty about this guy. I don't know what in the world you guys are going on about. And then washes his hands, basically saying, I'm innocent of this man's blood. No, actually, he wasn't innocent at all. He was just as guilty as the rest of the crowd was. However, I'm using that as an illustration for those of you out there that say there's no choice this November, and that I'm going to choose to sit this out. Then you're no better than Pilate, who clearly sees a distinction between what the crowd is saying and what your own evidence is suggesting to you about Jesus, and you ceremoniously just say, you know what, there's nothing for me in this election. I don't like Trump. I don't like Harris. I'm just going to sit it out. There's no neutrality, folks. You cannot be neutral. That's silly. Every election has been a binary choice. Every once in a while, there's three on the ticket, right? Ross Perot was an exception in 1992 who got 19% of the vote. That's the first time in our 248 years of history that a third party got that big of a share of the vote during the federal election. But I'm going to tell you folks out there, specifically you evangelicals, you are guilty if you do not vote. You're guilty and you're not neutral. You are actually taking a side, and it may not be the side that you want. Some of you probably sat out 2020 thinking that it was a fait accompli. And I'm telling you folks, in just a few short weeks, ballots, in fact, in just a couple weeks, ballots are going to drop here in California. I would say vote early and vote late. Swamp them early, swamp them late. Swamp them with a bunch of early voting. Swamp them on the day of. If your conviction is to go out on the day of the election, fine, do it. November 5th, great. Get your little sticker, put it on your little lapel, take a little quick pic with your little selfie stick and put it on Facebook and Instagram. I voted. There you go, folks. You need to get out to vote. Next week, we'll catch you here on Hometown Station. We're going to have Colonel Schlichter, I think, will be joining us on the show, and encourage you to listen in. as, we get real close to the election. Things are going to get more and more interesting. So the show is going to get a little more laser focused. This is your holy host saying thank you for tuning in here on your hometown station. We'll catch you next week here on Politics in the Pulpit. Same bat time, same bat channel. Take care.